Earth's skies were set alight in apocalyptic flames as alien craft streaked towards panicking human cities, not knowing the world-ending mistake they had just made in attacking a planet inhabited by the most dangerous species in the galaxy, humans. Aboard the command ship looming in low orbit, Benzite Fleet Commander Hector reclined in his gravity chair, feeling supremely smug. His second, Zadok, approached, bowing obsequiously. "The invasion proceeds as planned, Exalted One. Our simulations project total planetary control within 5 rotations. These primitives are centuries behind us." Hector waved a scaly appendage. As expected, their feeble armies still toss metal slugs at each other like cavemen throwing rocks. Conquering them will be like squashing insects. What resources have the scouts identified? Zadok pulled up a hologram. Vast fuel, metal and mineral deposits, more than enough to power our expansion for 1,000 years, and an abundance of able-bodied bipeds to process and serve us. Hector hissed with delight as he swiped through intelligence reports on Terran capabilities. Lumbering metal vehicles, powered by burning liquefied dead organisms, crude flying craft that could barely reach their own moon, fractured tribal states more concerned with petty territorial squabbles than advancing their species to the stars. It was like they were begging to be conquered. Any obstacles of note? Nothing significant, although there was one thing. Zadok hesitated. An intercept of a transmission from a Jordan Mason, warning his fellow humans of an imminent alien threat. He proposed some sort of planetary defense initiative. Hector's scaled shoulders shook with laughter as he pulled up the intercept. The human's words were met with scorn and mockery from his own kind, decrying him as a lunatic and warmonger. They stared into the face of their doom, and yet they called him mad. Hector would enjoy enslaving that one personally. "Ignore it. They are clueless cattle. Take us into bombardment range and—" Hector's words died in his throat as a proximity alert blared. He had one moment to gape in shock at the impossible reading before the bridge view screen exploded in blinding light. Alarms blared throughout the command ship as Hector and Zadok scrambled to monitor Earth's communications while finalizing their invasion preparations. A news broadcast was intercepted, showing a human named Jordan Mason delivering an impassioned speech at an organization called the UN. Mason implored the planet's fractured leadership to unite against the impending alien threat. "We must put aside our petty squabbles and stand together as one species in the face of annihilation," Mason declared, his voice resonating with conviction. "I have credible intelligence on our enemy's capabilities. They are called the Benzites, and while their technology may be advanced, they are not invincible." Hector and Zadok watched the broadcast, stunned as Mason rattled off precise specs on Benzite ship classifications, weapon systems, and troop numbers. It was far more than any human should know. Zadok turned to Hector, scales rippling with unease. "Exalted One, this Mason human knows too much. He speaks of a secret source. I believe we should delay the invasion and investigate this information leak." Hector waved a dismissive claw. "Nonsense. Even if this Mason is correct about our forces, which I doubt, he vastly overestimates his species' primitive abilities to resist us." "But Exalted One—" "We proceed as planned," Hector snapped. "And we start by having our ground troops kill this Jordan Mason, cut off the head of their resistance before it starts." Hector opened a comm channel and barked orders for the trooplanders to begin their assault. He then broadcast a message across all Earth frequencies, announcing the Benzites' intention to seize the planet and its resources. The humans' reaction would be priceless. Hector and Zadok watched the news feeds intently, relishing the chance to witness their new subjects descend into mass panic and despair. But the reaction was not as they anticipated. The human reporters seemed surprised but strangely calm as they relayed instructions for citizens to report to designated civil defense shelters. Zadok clicked his mandibles in consternation. "It's as if they've been preparing for this. The situation may be more complex than we assumed." Before Hector could respond, a flashing light on the command console demanded his attention. Long-range sensors had picked up a tiny spacecraft approaching the Benzite fleet at impossible velocity. Hector pulled up the readings and froze. The energy signature coming off the vessel was astronomical, like nothing he had ever seen. He met Zardok's disbelieving stare, a sense of creeping dread chilling his blood. The bridge proximity alarm shrieked again, warning of the incoming bogey. Hector opened his jaws to bark an order, but his words were swallowed by a blast of blinding radiance that flooded the view screen. Hector felt himself hurled backwards by a concussive wave of force, his chair's grave field flickering. Emergency klaxons howled and the acrid stench of fried circuits flooded his nostrils. The deck bucked and yawed sickeningly beneath him. "Report!" Hector roared, dragging himself upright. The view screen was a crackling wall of static. Zardok hauled himself off the floor, green ichor leaking from a gash on his head crest. He staggered to the sensor station, talons flying across the console. "Shields are down, weapons offline. Hull breach on decks 7 through 12. By the brood cluster, our port engine is gone." "What hit us?" Hector snarled, fury and confusion warring within him. This couldn't be happening. Not to the mighty Benzite Dominion, not at the hands of primitives still burning their dead for fuel. "I don't know, Exalted One. Sensors are a mess. Wait, I'm getting a visual, putting it on screen." The static resolved into an impossible image, a lone tiny spacecraft hovering before the wounded Benzite dreadnought. It was a flimsy-looking thing, all asymmetrical angles and curves, like some ancient human projectile. Hector gaped at it, trying to process how something so small had just crippled his mighty warship with a single shot. As if in answer to his unspoken question, the human vessel shimmered and split apart, unfolding and reconfiguring into a sleek, deadly-looking fighter bristling with weapons. Emblazoned on its prow was a name: Terra's Fury. Hector's guts turned to ice as he beheld the emblem beneath the name, a coiled serpent devouring a Benzite skull. A comm request from the human ship blinked on the screen. Hector shared a stricken look with Zardok, a terrible realization dawning. With a trembling claw, he opened the channel. The screen filled with an unsmiling human face, cold and hard as a funeral moon. Hector instantly recognized him from the intercepted broadcast. "Jordan Mason," Hector croaked past a tongue gone dry as the Jacoran desert. "What? How?" "Hello, Hector," Mason said, his voice as chill as interstellar void. "If you're wondering how I know so much about you, I had a little inside help." The camera pulled back to reveal a familiar figure standing at Mason's side. Zardok gasped in recognition. "Greetings, Exalted One," High Commander Kraxon said, the title oozing scorn. "Or should I say disgraced one? Did you really think I would let you lead our people to ruin in a war against the humans?" Hector could only gape in mute horror as the terrible truth crashed over him. He had been betrayed. The humans had known they were coming. And now, it seemed, the hunters were about to become the hunted. Mason leaned forward, his eyes twin lasers boring into Hector's soul. When he spoke again, each word told like the bell of doom. "This is the voice of terror. We know everything about you, Hector of the Benzites, and we have a message for you and your kind." Mason smiled then, a terrible rictus devoid of warmth or mercy. "Welcome to Earth. Unknown vessel, this is Supreme Commander Hector of the Benzite Dominion." Hector growled into the comm, his voice cold and imperious. "Identify yourself immediately or be destroyed." Zardok tilted his head, perplexed, as a response came back in flawless Benzite. "Greetings, Supreme Commander Hector. This is Jordan Mason of Earth. I request to speak with you directly." Hector and Zardok shared a shocked glance. Hector hesitated only a moment, before his pride and curiosity overrode his caution. He opened the channel, the screen filled with the calm, confident visage of the very human they had just been discussing. Mason inclined his head respectfully. "Thank you for accepting my hail, Supreme Commander. I'll get right to the point. I'm here to inform you that Earth is fully prepared to repel your invasion. We request that you withdraw your forces immediately." Hector barked a harsh laugh. "You must be joking. Do you intend to fight off the might of the Benzite Dominion alone in your puny ship?" Mason smiled serenely. "Oh, I have no intention of fighting you, Supreme Commander. I'm here to offer you a choice. Leave Earth in peace and never return, and no harm will come to you or your people." Hector surged to his feet, apoplectic with rage. "You dare dictate terms to me, human? What could your primitive species possibly offer the Benzite Empire to deter us from taking what we want?" Mason didn't reply. He simply reached forward and touched a button on his console. A second later, alarms blared as the Benzite sensors registered a massive energy surge emanating from the planet below. Hector and Zardoc stared at the readouts in disbelief as on the view screen, a grid of enormous cannons rose from camouflaged silos across Earth's surface. As one, the cannon turrets swiveled and oriented directly on the Benzite fleet. Zardoc's talons flew across his console, frantically analyzing the data. His throat worked as he turned to Hector, eyes wide with dawning horror. "Supreme Commander, the energy signatures of those cannons, they match the output of this vessel, and the power readings—" He swallowed hard. "A single shot from just one of those weapons would be sufficient to vaporize our entire fleet." Hector rounded on the screen, veins bulging in his neck as he jabbed a claw at Mason. "Impossible! I will not be deceived by your tricks and illusions. No human could possess such advanced weaponry." Mason spread his hands and shrugged, his expression almost apologetic. "I understand your skepticism, Supreme Commander, but I assure you this is no bluff. I am simply here as Earth's messenger. Our world's governments have authorized me to negotiate on their behalf. But the choice is yours. Leave our planet in peace or face the consequences." Hector sputtered and snarled, but before he could formulate a retort, Mason spoke again, his tone deceptively casual. "I would consider your next actions very carefully, Hector. It would be a terrible shame if there were some misunderstanding, and our planetary defense grid mistook your posture as openly hostile." Hector froze as Mason leaned forward, his eyes hard as flint and cold as the void. "The people of Earth have empowered me to make you this one-time offer, Supreme Commander. You have 60 of our seconds to accept these extremely generous terms or be utterly destroyed. The choice is yours." The blood drained from Hector's scaled visage as Mason's words sank in. He slammed a fist on the console, making Zardoc flinch. "Impossible! How could your primitive species develop such weaponry without our knowledge?" Mason chuckled, a sound devoid of mirth. "You Benzites always were an arrogant bunch. Did you really think your cloaked probes went undetected during your last little scouting mission a decade ago?" Hector's eyes widened in realization as Mason continued. "Oh yes, we captured your sneaky little spy drones, and our scientists had a field day reverse engineering them. That single windfall jump-started a massive black project to prepare our defenses for your inevitable invasion." The human gestured to his ship on the view screen. "The energy readings you're detecting from my vessel, that's a miniaturized version of your own power core technology. The very same tech now powering those planetary cannons aimed at your fleet." Hector was reeling, but he marshaled his fury to bark out, "And you, Mason? How does a lone human know so much about the mighty Benzite Dominion?" Mason's grin was razor-edged. "Because I was the lead researcher on the project, Hector. I've spent years studying your species, your technology, your tactics. I know more about you than you know about yourselves." As if to punctuate his point, the command ship's sensors lit up with contacts as an entire squadron of small human attack craft shimmered into view behind Mason's ship. They all bore the same staggering energy signatures. "As you can see," Mason said casually, "the planetary grid is more than sufficient to deal with your fleet. But we felt it prudent to have some more mobile defenses as well. A little something we whipped up, based on your own designs, of course." Zardoc leaned in to whisper urgently in Hector's ear. "Exalted One, none of this makes sense. The humans are supposed to be primitive, helpless before us. We never detected any of this." Hector rounded on his subordinate with a vicious snarl. "I can see our intel was flawed, imbecile." From the view screen, Mason cleared his throat pointedly. Hector whipped back around to face him. In case you've lost track of time, the human said, you have about 30 of our seconds left before the defense grid opens fire. I'd make your choice quickly if I were you. Hector glared at the human's maddeningly calm visage, his mind racing. Benzite doctrine was clear. A wise commander does not throw away the lives of his troops in an unwinnable battle. As if sensing his train of thought, Zardoc murmured from beside him, Exalted One, we may have lost this battle, but the war is not over. Our main fleet is still out there with 100 times the ships and firepower. We can retreat, regroup, and return with a force the humans cannot hope to resist. Slowly, Hector nodded. As much as it galled him to admit defeat, especially to a lowly species like humanity, he had to face reality. He met Mason's cool gaze and ground out his response. I don't accept your terms, Jordan Mason of Earth. The Benzite fleet will withdraw. Mason smiled thinly and inclined his head. A wise choice, Supreme Commander. His eyes hardened to chips of flint. But let me be clear. Earth is off limits, permanently. If you ever return, we will not be so merciful again. Hector clenched his jaw, the words bitter as bile, but he jerked his head in acknowledgement. Mason reached forward, his finger hovering over a key. Oh, and Hector, one more thing. The human's eyes bored into Hector's, dark and pitiless as a black hole. My name isn't Jordan Mason, it's Marcus Craxon, remember it. With that, the transmission cut out, leaving Hector and Zardoc staring at a screen full of static. After a beat of stunned silence, Hector rounded on his second. Get us out of here now. Set course for the rendezvous point with the main fleet. We have plans to make. As Zardoc scrambled to obey, Hector collapsed back into his command chair, talons digging gouges into the armrests. He glared at the blue-white globe of Earth spinning peacefully on the view screen. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Humanity would pay for this humiliation. Hector would make sure of that. The Benzite ships came about, lumbering out of orbit and setting course out of the Terran system. Hector's eyes never left the image of the receding planet, his rage and hatred a seething maelstrom within him. As the fleet transited to interstellar space, a single thought blazed in Hector's mind, searing itself into his very being. Humanity would burn. He would see to it personally, even if it took 1,000 years. This insult would be repaid 1,000-fold. Earth would die screaming, and Marcus Craxon would be the first to feel Hector's vengeance. This the Supreme Commander swore on his life. Mason smiled thinly as Hector ground out his grudging acceptance of Earth's terms. The Supreme Commander's scaled visage was a mask of barely contained fury, but he gave a curt nod, acknowledging the reality of his situation. A wise choice, Hector, Mason said. He was about to reach for the disconnect button when he paused, holding up a hand. But there is one more thing you should know. Hector's eyes narrowed to slits. What now, human? He practically spat the last word. Mason's expression turned cold as vacuum. Earth is well aware that the Benzites are not a species to give up after a single setback. We fully expect you to regroup and return, no doubt with a far larger fleet. Zardoc shifted uneasily, but Mason continued before the Benzite could interject. To that end, we've taken out a little insurance policy, shall we say, to guarantee Earth's safety in the long term. Hector leaned forward, talons digging into the arms of his command chair. What are you talking about? Mason's smile was thin as a razor's edge. While you were so focused on Earth, our stealth ships were busy paying visits to your colony worlds. At this very moment, cloaked human defense cannons are in place on every single one, all slaved to a central command system controlled from right here on Earth. The blood drained from Hector's face as the implications sank in. Zardoc looked like he might be sick. Mason drove the point home remorselessly. If the Benzite Dominion ever attempts to attack Earth again, our planetary defense grid will engage, but it won't be targeting your invading fleet. His eyes were chips of flint. We'll be aiming at your civilian population centers. Your colonies will burn before your ships even cross the orbit of Pluto. So you can't, Zardoc blurted, unable to contain his horror. Slaughtering civilians, it's unconscionable. Mason rounded on the Benzite, his face a thundercloud. Oh, and you were so concerned about human civilians when you came to conquer us? His voice dripped scorn. Turnabout is fair play, Zardok. If you don't want your people to suffer, then you'll leave mine the hell alone. This is madness, Hector managed through numb lips. Holding entire worlds hostage, it's a war crime. Mason shrugged, a casual gesture utterly at odds with his glacial expression. You started this war, Hector. We're just making damn sure we finish it. Hector shook his head slowly, disbelievingly. The High Command, they'll never believe this. Mason's smile was a death's head grin. They're welcome to test that theory, but I wouldn't advise it. The defense grid is already active, and you really should be going now. Hector opened his mouth, but no words came. There was nothing left to say. He stared at the human, this Jordan Mason who was so much more than he had seemed, and saw his own death writ in those merciless eyes. Mason reached forward, his hand hovering over a button. Remember this moment, Hector Zardok. Remember that we could have wiped you out with a word, and remember that we still can, if you ever dare threaten Earth again. His finger stabbed down and the transmission cut to static. Hector sagged back in his chair, a marionette with its strings cut. Zardok gripped the edge of the console, his talons leaving scores in the alloy. On the view screen, the human ships moved into escort formation, around the battered Benzite fleet. Not to herd or corral, Hector realized, but to make sure they left. Earth wasn't asking them to go. It was telling them. As the ragged remains of his once proud armada limped towards the edge of the Sol system, Zardok turned to him, his voice a haunted whisper. Exalted One, what have we unleashed? Hector could only shake his head, his gaze fixed on the receding blue-white marble that had so nearly been their tomb. The planet looked so fragile from here, so deceptively peaceful. But now he knew the truth. Beneath that placid facade lurked a species as ruthless and implacable as any in the galaxy. No, more so. The Benzites thought themselves the apex predators of the cosmos, but now Hector saw that they had finally met their match, or perhaps their betters. The human ships peeled away as the fleet reached the heliopause, their purpose served. Hector watched until Earth's defenders were lost from view, swallowed up by the void. Then he turned away, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his failure and the horrifying knowledge of what humanity was truly capable of. The navigators laid in a course for the nearest friendly outpost, the jump drives humming to life. As the battered fleet accelerated into interstellar space, Hector sank into a bleak reverie, wondering how in the name of the Brood Cluster he was going to explain this debacle to the High Command. And more than that, he wondered what this day would mean for the future of the Benzite Dominion. The stars smeared into streaks of light as the ships leaped into hyperspace, leaving Earth far behind. But Hector knew that Blue World would haunt his dreams for a long, long time to come. The image of it burned in his mind as the fleet hurtled into the abyss, a fragile-looking gem spinning in the darkness, and upon its surface a species that had just declared its intention to survive, no matter the cost. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.